Now, let me start by saying this. I am not what you'd call a Zen type of fellow. I admire people who can sit cross-legged for an hour, breathing in perfect harmony with the universe, but my knees start protesting the moment I crouch down to tie my shoes. My natural rhythm is more along the lines of pour a cup of tea, find my slippers, and shuffle toward the recliner like a man on a mission. But lately, I'd been hearing a lot about meditation. My neighbor, the one who insists on mowing his lawn at the crack of dawn, swore that 10 minutes of mindful breathing completely changed his life. And my wife, God bless her, had been sending me articles about the health benefits: lower stress, better sleep, clearer thinking. One article even claimed it could make you a nicer person. She slid that one across the breakfast table with a little too much enthusiasm. So that evening, after another long day filled with misplaced glasses, phone calls that went nowhere, and a heated argument with the toaster, I thought, all right, Henry, let's give this meditation thing a whirl. The decision felt dramatic. It was as if I were about to embark on a spiritual quest. I straightened up in my chair, puffed out my chest, and announced to no one in particular, tonight I will master the art of inner peace. Of course, the cat looked up at me with all the skepticism in the world. If felines could roll their eyes, mine would have done a full somersault. But I was determined. I didn't just want relaxation. I wanted transformation, the kind of calm people write books about. Maybe, just maybe, I'd emerge from this experiment as the neighborhood's very first enlightened guru. Picture it. Henry, local man of wisdom, handing out advice at the corner store while holding a reusable shopping bag. That thought alone gave me such a surge of confidence that I marched around the house in search of meditation gear. Not that I had any, of course. I wasn't about to buy one of those fancy floor cushions with tassels. No, sir. I decided a folded bath towel would do just fine. The trouble was, by the time I'd found a clean one, the mood had already shifted. Instead of feeling like a peaceful monk, I felt like a man who'd just done light laundry. Still, I pressed on. I dimmed the living room lights, set my phone to Do Not Disturb, and even unplugged the landline phone that only ever rings when someone wants to sell me an extended car warranty. The room grew quiet. Eerily quiet, actually. I hadn't realized how many little hums and buzzes filled the house until they were gone. The refrigerator kicked off, the clock ticked louder, and somewhere outside, a cricket started chirping like it was auditioning for America's Got Talent. But I ignored it. This was my moment. I sat down in the recliner, because cross-legged on the floor was out of the question, and closed my eyes. Immediately, my brain rebelled. "Did you lock the front door?" it whispered. "Is the garage light still on?" it added. "Also, don't forget you promised your wife you'd fix that wobbly shelf in the pantry." I told my brain to hush. This was about focus, about presence. I inhaled deeply, then exhaled slowly, imagining myself as one of those serene figures on the meditation app commercials. The kind of person who always has a potted plant behind them and a suspiciously perfect cup of herbal tea nearby. Unfortunately, my tea was lukewarm by this point, and the only plant within reach was a drooping fern I'd been forgetting to water since June. Still, I pushed forward. I counted my breaths. 1 in, 1 out, 2 in, 2 out, 3 in. And oh wait, did I ever email back that dentist's office? This was harder than I thought. I tried picturing a calm place, like the instructions suggested. A meadow, perhaps, or a quiet beach. Instead, my imagination landed me in the frozen food aisle of the local grocery store, standing in front of a display of discounted chicken nuggets. Not exactly the oasis of tranquility I had in mind. I shook my head, refocused, and gave it another try. This time, I pictured a mountaintop. The wind was cool, the sky vast, and the view endless. Yes, this was better. But just as I started to relax into the vision, I realized I was also picturing myself carrying a backpack full of snacks, chips, cookies, and, yes, biscuits. So much for detachment from earthly cravings. At this point, my wife peeked in to see what I was doing. She found me sitting stiffly in the recliner with my eyes squeezed shut, face turning slightly red from all the deep breathing. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Shh," I whispered dramatically. "I'm meditating." She raised an eyebrow, muttered something about me looking like a constipated owl, and left the room. So much for moral support, but I wasn't giving up. I returned to my breathing, determined to ride this wave all the way to enlightenment. My chest rose, my chest fell, and slowly, very slowly, the room began to fade. The tick-tock of the clock grew softer, the crickets chirping blurred into the background, and even the cat's judgmental stare seemed less oppressive. For the first time, I felt a little floaty, like my mind was unclenching, finally loosening its grip on the grocery lists and the leaky faucet and the never-ending battle with the toaster. This was it. This was meditation. And then, just as I reached peak serenity, my recliner creaked loudly, jerking me back to reality. It sounded less like a chair and more like a haunted door opening in a horror movie. My eyes snapped open, heart pounding. The room looked exactly the same, but I was now suspicious of my own furniture. Could the recliner itself be testing my commitment to inner peace? I shifted, trying to find a quieter position, but the chair groaned again like it was auditioning for a role in a haunted house. I sighed, muttered something unspiritual, and promised myself I'd oil the hinges tomorrow. Still, I wasn't ready to call it quits. I closed my eyes once more and took another deep breath. In, out, and slowly I started to sink again. My thoughts slowed, my muscles softened. The world grew fuzzy. That's when it happened. Somewhere between the fifth inhale and the sixth exhale, my head began to nod. My chin dipped forward, then jerked back up. The same way you catch yourself dozing off during a boring late-night documentary about tax codes. Except this time, I was supposed to be meditating. Was this enlightenment? Or just the world's slowest nap? I couldn't tell, and honestly, at that moment, I didn't care. My breathing grew heavier, my posture slumped. The recliner groaned in surrender, and there I was, half awake, half asleep, trying to achieve spiritual balance but mostly achieving a stiff neck. That, dear friends, was the night I decided to finally try meditation. Little did I know, the real adventure was only just beginning. Now, before I could attempt any serious meditation, I knew I had to create the right environment. Every guide I skimmed, and I say skimmed because reading entire articles is far too ambitious at my age, insisted that atmosphere was crucial. Set the scene, they said. Make it calm, make it soft, make it soothing. So naturally, I began with the lights. I walked over to the lamp in the living room, the one with the shade that tilts just slightly to the left no matter how much I adjust it. I flicked it on, then off, then on again, squinting like I was running lighting cues for a Broadway play. Finally, I settled on the dim setting, soft enough to feel calm, but bright enough to keep me from tripping over the cat who was now sprawled across the carpet like a furry roadblock. Next came pajamas. And listen, I take bedtime attire very seriously. At this point in my life, I don't bother with sleep fashion. I'm not trying to impress anyone. I want comfort, pure, unfiltered comfort. So I reached for the softest pair I own, the blue cotton set that has survived more laundry cycles than I've survived New Year's resolutions. They're faded, they're frayed, but they are reliable. Slipping into them felt like stepping into a hug from the universe. My wife poked her head in at this point, took one look at me standing proudly in my beloved pajamas, and shook her head. "You know you look like a retired superhero, right?" she said. "Yes," I replied, tugging at the elastic waistband, "and tonight, my superpower is inner peace." She rolled her eyes, muttered something about making sure I didn't levitate in my sleep, and disappeared down the hall. Atmosphere. Check. Pajamas. Check. Now it was time for sound. I'd read that soft, soothing music could help the mind relax. Something ambient, something gentle. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through playlists. Rainforest sounds, ocean waves, Zen bamboo flute. I settled on Zen bamboo flute. Within seconds, the room was filled with the sound of someone who, I imagine, has been playing the same note for 20 years. My cat twitched his ears in annoyance. My recliner creaked in protest. But I thought it was rather nice, calming, for about 30 seconds. Then I realized it reminded me of the time I got stuck in an elevator at the mall, the same droning, endless background noise. Not exactly the memory I wanted to bring into my meditation practice, so I switched to ocean waves. Now, that was better. The steady whoosh of water rolling onto sand, the occasional distant gull. Perfect. I closed my eyes and could almost smell the salt air. Except, of course, the sound also reminded me that I probably should have used the bathroom before I sat down. Nothing like a steady wave soundtrack to test the limits of your bladder. I paused, handled that little detail, and returned with renewed determination. Everything was ready. Lights dim, pajamas on, music flowing, and me in the recliner like a man about to conduct business with the universe. But then, because the universe has a wicked sense of humor, I realized I'd forgotten my tea. Now, let me be clear. You cannot embark on an evening ritual in my house without a proper cup of tea. It's like trying to launch a rocket without fuel. So I shuffled back to the kitchen, slippers whispering across the floor, and put the kettle on. While the water boiled, I caught my reflection in the microwave door. There I was, a man in his 50s standing in pajamas, squinting at himself with the kind of gravitas usually reserved for philosophers. "This," I muttered, "is the face of a man about to conquer stress." The microwave, unbothered, blinked 12 o'clock at me in eternal defiance. When the kettle finally whistled, I poured the water, dropped in a bag of chamomile, and stirred with the reverence of a priest mixing holy water. I carried the mug carefully back to the recliner, holding it steady like a waiter in a fancy restaurant. At last. Everything was in place. I set the mug on the side table, adjusted my pajama waistband for maximum breathing capacity, and sat back with a satisfied sigh. The room glowed softly. The ocean waves whispered from the phone speaker. My slippers hugged my feet like old friends. If inner peace didn't find me here, it was officially avoiding me on purpose. Now came the mental preparation. Every meditation article I'd skimmed recommended starting with an intention, something simple like, "I will relax," or "I will find calm." So I thought about what my intention should be. I will stay awake, I decided, because knowing me, sleep would arrive faster than enlightenment. The cat jumped onto the armrest at this point, glaring at me like my spiritual advisor. I swear, he radiated judgment. I patted his head, muttered, "You don't know stress until you've argued with a toaster," and closed my eyes again. And that's when things got interesting. The combination of dim lights, chamomile steam, and ocean waves began to weave a net around me. My mind slowed. My breathing deepened. For a few brief, shining moments, I felt like I was actually doing it, like I had cracked the code to this mysterious meditation business. But of course, just as the calm began to settle, my recliner groaned again, loudly, like it had a personal vendetta against tranquility. I froze, eyes still shut, hoping maybe I could intimidate the chair into silence with sheer willpower. The chair responded with another groan. "Fine," I whispered, "you win." But at least let me finish this session. I shifted, sipped my tea, and resettled myself with all the seriousness of a monk adjusting his robes. Lights, low, pajamas, on, music, ocean, tea, hot, chair, hostile. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And as I sat there, adjusting my breathing and trying to ignore the suspicious creaks of my furniture, I realized something important. Setting the scene isn't really about perfection. It's about building a little cocoon for yourself. A safe, cozy place where even the groans and quirks feel like part of the ritual. And in that moment, with chamomile steam curling under my nose and the ocean waves playing back up to the rhythm of my own breath, I thought, maybe I really could pull this off. Little did I know, the real test wasn't the setting. It was what would happen once I actually started meditating. I had the whole scene set. The lights were soft, the ocean waves were lapping out of my phone like I'd rented beachfront property in my living room. My chamomile tea was at that exact temperature where it doesn't burn your tongue but still feels like a hug from the inside. Everything was lined up like dominoes, waiting for enlightenment to just topple over and land in my lap. The instructions I'd skimmed online were simple enough. Sit still, breathe deeply, clear your mind. 3 steps. Easy. I've assembled IKEA furniture with less guidance, so I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, let it out slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth, I whispered to myself, sounding less like a Zen master and more like a man trying to talk himself through parallel parking. At first, it was pleasant. My chest rose, my shoulders dropped, the tension in my back seemed to melt. I thought, maybe I'm actually good at this, which, of course, was the exact moment my brain decided to join the party. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about meditation. Once you try to clear your mind, every single ridiculous thought you've ever had shows up at the door like trick-or-treaters on Halloween. 1 breath in. Did I pay the water bill? 1 breath out. What if raccoons figured out how to use doorknobs? Inhale. I should really check the expiration date on that ranch dressing. Exhale. What if my left slipper is slightly bigger than my right one, and I just never noticed? I tell you, the thoughts were relentless. It was like my brain had been saving up nonsense all day just to unload it in this one quiet moment. Still, I tried to stay calm. I imagined myself sitting cross-legged on a mountain peak, overlooking a valley bathed in golden light, majestic, tranquil. Then, out of nowhere, my left knee popped like a firecracker. Reality came crashing back. "All right," I muttered, cracking one eye open. "No mountain peaks for this guy." Stick to the recliner, I reset, closed my eyes again, tried focusing on the sound of the waves. In, out, in, out. Slowly, I felt my thoughts start to quiet. My eyelids grew heavier. The chair seemed to swallow me whole. This is it, I thought. This is what all those meditation folks are raving about. And then, of course, the refrigerator kicked on with a low, rattling hum. You know how, when you're trying to fall asleep in a hotel, there's always some mysterious noise that sounds like a helicopter hovering outside your window. That was my fridge. Suddenly, I wasn't on a tranquil beach anymore. I was in the middle of a runway at JFK. I cracked both eyes open this time, glaring in the direction of the kitchen. The fridge, unfazed, continued to growl. The cat twitched his tail, unimpressed with my lack of focus. "Fine," I said. "We meditate with appliances. That's just part of the journey back to breathing, back to focus." And that's when I noticed something strange. My breathing had slowed down, sure, but so had everything else. My head lolled to the side, my jaw relaxed. At one point, I'm fairly certain I began drooling, not exactly the dignified image of inner peace I'd envisioned. Still, I pressed on. I whispered my mantra, something simple, something I thought would keep me steady. I'm calm. I'm relaxed. I will not think about the leftover lasagna in the fridge spoiler. I thought about the lasagna. In fact, I began planning out how good it would taste reheated, whether I should add garlic bread, and why we don't have a microwave that sings when the food's done. A full mental recipe, all while I was supposed to be clearing my mind. But here's the thing, I didn't stop. I just kept breathing, kept trying, kept coaxing my brain back from its lasagna daydreams to the imaginary beach. And then, in the middle of this delicate balance between serenity and snacks, it happened. My head tipped forward. My chin hit my chest. I snapped awake with a little snort that sounded suspiciously like a lawnmower refusing to start. I looked around, blinking in the dim light. The tea had gone cold. The playlist had looped back to the start, and my cat was staring at me with that mix of pity and disdain reserved only for humans who think they're smarter than they are. I checked the clock. 35 minutes had passed. 35 minutes of what was supposed to be meditation, but in reality was me falling asleep sitting upright like an exhausted grandpa at a high school play. And that's when I realized something. Maybe meditation wasn't about clearing your mind or reaching nirvana or floating 3 inches off the recliner. Maybe, for me at least, it was just about giving myself permission to stop, to breathe, to be still, even if it came with drool and a stiff neck. Still, I wasn't ready to admit defeat. Not yet, because the night was still young and I was determined to conquer this whole meditation thing, even if it meant battling refrigerators, intrusive thoughts, and my own talent for mid-breath naps. You know how people always say, find a quiet place to meditate? Well, that's easy if you live in a mountain cabin or a lakeside retreat, but if you live in a suburban cul-de-sac like mine, where peace and quiet are rare visitors, usually chased off by leaf blowers, it's about as realistic as trying to bake a cake in a snowstorm. Now, I didn't realize just how much my environment had stacked the odds against me until that night. Because the moment I sat down cross-legged on my living room rug, closed my eyes, and tried my very first noble deep breath in, deep breath out, the neighborhood woke up like it was auditioning for a Broadway musical. Let's start with my next-door neighbor, Bob. Bob, a kind man, very neighborly, always offers to lend me his tools, though usually the tool he lends me is broken. But Bob owns a lawnmower that I'm convinced could double as a jet engine, and Bob has a habit of mowing at unusual hours. So naturally, the moment I reached my second breath, I heard it. Brrrr. It rattled my window panes. My meditation cushion vibrated like I'd plopped down on top of a washing machine during spin cycle. At first, I thought maybe Bob had lost track of time. But then I remembered. This is Bob. He once painted his garage door at midnight because the weather was right. For him, mowing under the moonlight was just another Tuesday. I peeked out the window. Sure enough, there he was, pushing that mower in neat, determined rows, wearing a headlamp like some sort of suburban spelunker. Now, if it had just been Bob, I might have managed. But across the street lives Mrs. Henderson, lovely woman, bakes a mean banana bread. Unfortunately, she also owns 3 tiny, enthusiastic dogs. And those dogs bark at everything. And I mean everything. When a squirrel runs across the lawn, bark. When the mail truck so much as slows down, bark, bark. When I once sneezed while getting the paper, bark, bark, bark. So of course, Bob's midnight mowing set them off like sirens at a fire station. Yip, 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 yip. Arf, 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 arf. Yap, 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 yap. Suddenly, my living room wasn't a peaceful meditation chamber. It was a stadium filled with angry sports fans who'd just watched their team fumble. But wait, we're not done. Because down the block lives a teenager named Kyle. Nice kid, lots of energy. Plays the drums. And when does Kyle like to practice? Why, in the evenings, of course. Sometimes at 7, sometimes at 9, sometimes right when I decide to become a better human being through meditation. So on top of Bob's mower and the Henderson dogs, I suddenly heard crash, boom, da-da-da, crash. At first, I thought it might just be a few beats, but no. Kyle had clearly entered into what I can only describe as the extended garage band world tour, complete with solos. By now, my inner mantra of inhale calm, exhale chaos had turned into inhale panic, exhale frustration. I tried. Truly, I tried. I sat there with my hands on my knees, breathing like a champ, telling myself I was a Zen master in training. A true meditator, I whispered, accepts all sounds as part of the universe. And then my wife turned on the vacuum cleaner. Yes, the vacuum. Right outside the living room door. Now, I don't want you to think my wife was being unkind. She was simply tidying up as she often does in the evenings. But let me tell you something. When you are trying to picture yourself as a calm lotus flower in a peaceful pond, the shriek of a vacuum cleaner is not helpful. It's the audio version of stepping on a Lego. So let's recap. Bob's lawnmower providing the bass. Mrs. Henderson's dogs providing the high-pitched chorus. Kyle on drums, the percussion section from the underworld. My wife's vacuum, a whiny electric violin that never stops. And there I was, in the center of it all, sitting cross-legged like some kind of bewildered orchestra conductor without a baton. It was absurd. At first, I tried to adapt. I renamed the noises in my head to make them sound spiritual. Bob's mower? The eternal hum of the cosmos. The dogs? Voices of the wild. Kyle's drums? The thunder of youth. The vacuum. The great cosmic suck. I thought maybe I could accept it all. Maybe meditation wasn't about escaping noise. Maybe it was about embracing it. That lasted all of 37 seconds. Then Bob hit a rock, the mower clanged, the dogs went berserk, and Kyle launched into what sounded like the 20-minute extended remix of Smoke on the Water. I lost it. I toppled backwards onto the rug with a groan so dramatic it startled the cat, who glared at me like I was meditating before it was cool, human. Then she flicked her tail and left the room in disgust. But here's where things took a strange turn. Lying there on the rug, surrounded by all that noise, I started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, full-on, belly-shaking laughter. Because it was ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. I had set out to find silence in the one place where silence simply doesn't exist. My neighborhood is not a monastery. It's not a mountain retreat. It's a collection of families, pets, lawn equipment, and vacuums, all of which have their own schedules that never once consider mine. And suddenly, I realized something. Maybe meditation wasn't about waiting for silence. Maybe it was about learning to sit with the noise. Maybe the whole trick was noticing the chaos, but not letting it throw you off balance. I didn't reach enlightenment, mind you, but I did reach a kind of acceptance. By the time the mower sputtered off, the dogs calmed down, and Kyle's drumsticks clattered to a stop, I was oddly content. I sat back up, crossed my legs again, and smiled at the absurdity of it all. And then, because life enjoys irony, I immediately fell asleep, sitting straight up. Apparently, my body decided, if the mind can't reach inner peace, unconsciousness will do. I must have looked like one of those stone monk statues people put in their gardens, except with my head tilted forward at a worrying angle, mouth open, and probably drooling just a little. When I woke up 20 minutes later, the house was silent. Blessedly, beautifully silent. And that nap, awkward posture and all, was the most restful I'd had in years. I'll be honest with you right from the start, my body is not built for lotus. It's built for recliners, front porch rocking chairs, and diner booths where you can slide in without knocking over the ketchup bottle. That's my wheelhouse. I'm a man who has perfected the art of getting comfortable in anything padded, preferably with armrests. So you can imagine the audacity when I decided, no, insisted, that I was going to meditate the right way. Cross-legged, spine tall, hands placed gracefully on my knees like I was auditioning for the cover of Yoga Digest, the geriatric edition. Now, if you've ever tried sitting like that in your 50s, you know it's less peaceful monk and more rusty lawn chair folding the wrong way. Within 2 minutes, my hips were filing complaints, my knees were writing angry letters, and my ankles were quietly planning their revenge. But here's the thing about stubbornness. It'll get you into some real situations. And I was determined. If the YouTube guy said lotus, then lotus it would be. I tried to imagine myself on some serene mountaintop, breathing in fresh Himalayan air. The reality? My living room carpet smelled faintly of Febreze and yesterday's popcorn. But hey, inner peace is inner peace, right? Now, the meditation guide said to focus on the sound of silence, which is all well and good if you live in a soundproof bubble. But I live in a perfectly average American neighborhood, so my silence included Bob across the street running his mower at 9 o'clock at night because apparently grass has a curfew. A car alarm 2 blocks away that beeped in time with my breathing. Very soothing. And my fridge, which suddenly decided to hum like it was auditioning for a barbershop quartet. Still, I pressed on. I closed my eyes, straightened my back, and told myself, Henry, you're doing it. You're meditating. This is enlightenment. For a while, it actually worked. My mind slowed down, my shoulders unclenched, even the buzzing fridge faded into the background. I thought, this is it. This is the path to serenity. Pretty soon I'll be levitating above the carpet like one of those monks in a travel documentary. And then, somewhere between inhale number 12 and exhale number 15, I tipped too far over the edge of relaxation. I fell asleep. Not a nice, stretched-out nap with a pillow under my head. I fell asleep upright, cross-legged, with my chin tucked into my chest like a deflated parade balloon. And here's where my dignity really took a hit. I don't snore politely. I don't hum like a sleepy kitten. No, my snoring is dramatic. It's a performance. If they ever need a sound effect for angry walrus with a head cold, I'm their guy. So picture it. Me, sitting like a half-melted action figure, snoring so loudly the neighbor's dog probably thought there was a thunderstorm rolling in. Somewhere out there, I bet a real monk snapped awake and said, "Ah yes, the sound of suffering, traveling across the cosmos." Now, my wife, bless her, wandered in at some point. She found me in this state, legs twisted like spaghetti, head bobbing, snoring like a Harley engine that won't start. And what did she do? Did she rush over in concern? Did she check to make sure I was breathing? She sighed, shook her head, and muttered, "I married a man who can't even stay awake while trying to relax." And then she walked away, just like that. Not even a second glance. This woman has been married to me long enough that my nonsense doesn't even register anymore. If she'd had a smartphone handy, I guarantee I'd be a viral TikTok by now. Middle-aged man discovers new yoga pose, snorasana. When I finally woke up, the first thing I realized was that my legs had gone completely numb. I tried to uncross them, but they refused. I toppled sideways onto the rug like a sack of flour. There I was, crawling on the carpet, massaging my calves, whispering, "Come on, circulation, don't fail me now." The cat looked at me like I was auditioning for a very bad reality show called Middle-Aged Men Try Fitness. But here's the kicker. I checked the clock. I'd been out for 20 minutes. Just 20 minutes. And somehow, it was the most refreshing nap I'd had in years. Better than my recliner naps. Better than those Sunday afternoon couch snoozes with the ball game murmuring in the background. Heck, better than the time I nodded off during jury duty, which, in my defense, was practically encouraged by the judge's voice. Who knew? After decades of chasing the perfect pillow and best mattress deals, my secret to deep rest turned out to be falling asleep like a confused bobblehead on the living room rug. I started imagining the possibilities. Maybe this was my calling. Forget selling essential oils or juicers. I could market a whole new wellness craze. Introducing the Lotus Nap. Sleep like a monk without moving to the Himalayas. Perfect for suburban dads, retirees, and anyone who thinks Downward Dog is just a stubborn beagle. Call now and we'll throw in a free set of knee pads and an ice pack. Tell me that wouldn't sell on late-night TV. Right between the knife set that cuts through cinder blocks and the exercise bike nobody uses after March. As ridiculous as it all was, when I stood up, wobbly, hair sticking out like I'd wrestled a leaf blower, I actually felt calmer. Maybe it wasn't meditation in the traditional sense, but maybe the point isn't doing it right. Sometimes peace sneaks up on you in the most undignified positions. Sometimes relaxation looks less like a monk on a mountaintop and more like a man in sweatpants, drooling on his pajama top, snoring like he's auditioning for a chainsaw orchestra. And honestly, that's fine. That's more than fine. Because that night taught me something important. You don't have to be perfect at relaxing. You don't need the right cushion, the right soundtrack, or the silence of a remote cabin. Sometimes all it takes is giving yourself permission to laugh at yourself, and maybe accidentally nodding off for 20 minutes in lotus position. So if you ever catch me looking cheerful at breakfast, just know. I've discovered a new yoga. It's called Snore Asana. Highly recommended. Now, if you've ever tried sitting still in silence, legs folded, back straight, breathing slow, you'll know it's a lot like putting a toddler in a high chair with a plate of broccoli. It's only a matter of time before something goes sideways. There I was, sitting cross-legged on my bedroom carpet, back against the dresser for support, hands perched on my knees in what I assumed was the universal sign of inner peace. Palms up, fingers kind of drooping like a wilted daisy. I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, and whispered to myself, breathe in calm, breathe out stress. For about 30 seconds, I felt like a guru. Honestly, I could have sold tickets, but then something odd happened. My body decided meditation was the same thing as pre-nap warm-up exercises. My head started doing that little bobbing dance, the one you see commuters doing on the subway when they're trying to convince themselves they're not asleep. Nope, just resting my eyes, they'll say, right before their forehead smacks the window. That was me, except my forehead had no subway window to lean on, just thin air. At one point, I snapped awake because I was convinced I'd just fallen off the couch. Except, of course, I wasn't on the couch. I was sitting cross-legged on the floor like a yoga dropout. You know that cartoon moment when a character jolts awake, arms flailing, eyes wide like dinner plates? That was me, only with less grace and more creaky joints. I tried to fight it. Oh, I fought it bravely. Inhale, exhale, think calm thoughts. But calm thoughts turned into daydreams faster than you can say yoga mat. Suddenly, I was thinking about whether I'd remembered to set the coffee pot for the morning. Then my brain wandered to an old episode of The Golden Girls where Sophia falls asleep mid-conversation. Ah, I thought, that's relatable. Next thing I knew, I wasn't thinking anymore. I was snoring. Now, I've been told my snore has a distinct rhythm. My wife insists it sounds like a lawnmower stuck in second gear, though I'd argue it has more of a jazz undertone, maybe even a bluesy vibe if you listen closely. Regardless, there I was, snoring away, sitting upright like some kind of Buddhist vacuum cleaner. It wasn't a dignified sound. At one point, I even startled myself awake with it. Imagine being so loud you interrupt your own nap. It's a special kind of talent right there. What made it funnier is that in the U.S., we have this unspoken rule about sleep. If you fall asleep on purpose, like in bed, it's perfectly respectable. But if you doze off anywhere else, suddenly you're the punchline. Fall asleep in a recliner, your family will snap pictures. Doze off at a ball game, you'll end up on the Jumbotron with 20,000 strangers laughing. Drift off at Thanksgiving dinner? Oh, congratulations. You're the official turkey coma mascot. So you can imagine what my wife thought when she walked in on me. Cross-legged, snoring like a freight train. I'll paint the scene for you. She opened the bedroom door slowly, probably expecting to find me deep in meditation, humming with inner tranquility. Maybe she even pictured me floating 2 inches off the ground like one of those wise monks you see in travel magazines. Instead, she found her husband slouched forward, chin on chest, arms still perched like wilted flowers, snoring like he was auditioning for a chainsaw commercial. She stood there in the doorway for a good 30 seconds, silently debating whether to wake me or just call America's funniest home videos. I swear I heard her stifling a laugh. When I finally stirred awake, blinking in confusion, the first words out of her mouth were, "Well, Henry, how's enlightenment treating you?" Now, I should tell you, there's no graceful way to recover from being caught meditating and snoring at the same time. I tried. Oh, I really did. I muttered something like, "It's part of the practice. You wouldn't understand." But let's be honest, no one's buying that. It's like trying to claim your mid-afternoon nap was actually a deep study of breathing mechanics. My wife just shook her head, muttering something about her spiritual warrior, and went off to make herself tea. And here's the kicker. She brought me back a mug too, like she was rewarding a toddler for at least trying. The funny thing is, despite the embarrassment, that doze-off was actually one of the most relaxing moments I'd had all week. I didn't achieve enlightenment, sure, but I did achieve 8 glorious minutes of unplanned, upright napping. And for anyone who's ever nodded off on the couch during a late-night sitcom rerun or dozed off in the recliner with a half-finished crossword on your lap, you'll know exactly the kind of peace I mean. So yes, I set out to meditate. And yes, I failed spectacularly. But in a strange way, it worked. Because when I woke up, I felt lighter, refreshed, maybe even a little enlightened if you squint at it sideways. And so, dear listener, that's how my grand experiment in mindfulness turned into the loudest, shortest, most ridiculous nap of my adult life. Now, I could have quietly brushed this whole thing under the rug, pretended my meditation experiment had gone exactly as planned, maybe even thrown around a few fancy words like mindfulness and transcendence until my wife nodded politely and moved on. But unfortunately, when you live with someone long enough, they become an expert in spotting your nonsense. And my wife? She's basically got a PhD in catching me red-handed. She didn't make fun of me right away. No, she's cleverer than that. She waited. Later that evening, while we were brushing our teeth side by side, she casually asked, "So, Henry, did you reach inner peace before or after the snoring started?" I almost choked on my toothpaste. You see, in my head, the incident was already fading into obscurity, but clearly for her, it was primetime comedy gold. I mumbled something along the lines of, "It's actually a very advanced form of sleep meditation. You wouldn't know about it." She gave me one of those looks, the kind where the eyebrows go up, lips pressed together, and she doesn't even bother responding. Just one long, silent stare that says, "You're not fooling anyone, buddy." Of course, the teasing didn't end there. Oh no. The next morning, I found a sticky note on my coffee mug that read, "Enlightened One." At dinner that night, she asked me if I wanted a cushion for my chair, in case I felt another wave of spiritual energy coming on. By day 3, she had started calling me Guru Henry. At one point, she even folded a towel into a little square and set it on the living room floor, announcing, "Your meditation throne awaits." I tell you, nothing humbles a man faster than being serenaded with his own snores while his wife imitates a monk's chant in the background. Now, here's where it escalated. Somehow, my little meditation mishap didn't stay between the two of us. She let it slip to our daughter during a phone call. Next thing I know, I'm getting texts with gifs of people falling asleep mid-yoga pose. My daughter even sent me a meme of a raccoon slumped over a log with the caption, "Dad achieving inner peace." And of course, she couldn't resist telling her brother. So now my son calls me the snoring monk every time we chat. This is what family is for in America. Not support, not encouragement. No, it's making sure every embarrassing thing you do becomes a long-running inside joke. To make matters worse, my wife accidentally, or maybe accidentally on purpose, mentioned it to our neighbor Bob. You know Bob, every neighborhood's got one. The kind of guy who mows his lawn 3 times a week just so he can judge the length of your grass. Anyway, Bob showed up the next weekend while I was fiddling with the hedge clippers. He leaned over the fence and said, "Hey Henry, I hear you've reached nirvana. Congratulations. Did you need a pillow for your enlightenment sessions?" I froze mid-snip, clippers dangling in my hand, wondering how my personal journey to self-discovery had turned into neighborhood gossip. You'd think I'd won the lottery the way everyone carried on. Except instead of prize money, my reward was becoming the butt of every joke at Sunday potluck. Look, I've always believed Americans have 2 great national pastimes, baseball and roasting each other for sport. And in my family, we're not exactly big on baseball, so really I should have seen this coming. The second my wife walked in and caught me snoring in a meditation pose, it was all over. Privacy, gone. Dignity, out the window. Now I'm basically a cautionary tale for anyone who dares to close their eyes before bedtime in this house. Of course, I wasn't going to let everyone else have all the fun. If there's one thing I've learned after years of marriage, it's this. Sometimes the only way to survive is to lean into the joke. So I started calling myself Henry the Mindful. I'd sit in the recliner, close my eyes for a quick nap, and announce, "Excuse me, I'm about to enter a higher plane." When dinner conversation got quiet, I'd mutter, "You know, the secret to true happiness is learning to snore in rhythm with your soul." My wife would roll her eyes so hard, I thought they might get stuck. But hey, if I'm going to be the joke, I might as well write the punchlines myself. And you know what? As much as I pretended to be annoyed, I actually enjoyed the whole ordeal. There's something deeply comforting about being roasted by people who love you. In America, that's how we show affection. If your family's not making fun of you, you start to wonder if something's wrong. Besides, in an odd way, it kept me humble. Here I was, trying to chase after enlightenment like some wise sage, and instead, I ended up providing comic relief for everyone from my wife to the guy next door. It was a good reminder that sometimes the best meditation is just learning to laugh at yourself. And that, my friends, is how one quiet evening of self-discovery spiraled into a full-blown family comedy routine. Around here, they still haven't let me live it down. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. By the time the dust settled, or in this case, by the time everyone finished laughing at me, it was clear my meditation experiment had become more of a family folklore moment than a private practice. And yet, in the middle of all the teasing, I actually did come away with a lesson or two. Now, I'm not saying I unlocked the mysteries of the universe or that I reached enlightenment while drooling into my recliner. But maybe, just maybe, the whole thing gave me exactly what I needed. Here's the first thing I learned. Meditation isn't nearly as simple as they make it sound. You see all those serene-looking people on YouTube or in glossy magazines. They sit cross-legged on a mat, eyes closed, hands resting gently on their knees. They look like they've got everything under control. Like inner peace is just one deep breath away. What they don't show you is the part where your nose itches the second you close your eyes, or when your left leg falls asleep before your brain does, or how the sound of calming ocean waves makes you desperately need to use the bathroom. Meditation, it turns out, is a bit like assembling IKEA furniture. Looks easy in the pictures, but the reality involves way more discomfort, second-guessing, and the occasional urge to give up entirely. Now, here's the second lesson, and honestly, this one might be the most important. Sometimes falling asleep is the meditation. Think about it. What was I trying to achieve that night? Relaxation, a calmer mind, a smoother transition into bedtime. And what happened? I sat down, got comfy, and nodded off in record time. Mission accomplished. Sure, I didn't end up hovering above my chair in a state of pure bliss, but I did wake up a little more rested. And isn't that the real point? In America, we're always told we have to optimize everything, track our steps, count our calories, measure our productivity. But sometimes the simplest success is just nodding off when you need it most. And here's the final takeaway. Laughter goes a lot further than perfection ever could. If my meditation had gone flawlessly, I would have sat there quietly, maybe gotten a decent night's sleep, and that would have been the end of it. But because I botched it, because I fell asleep sitting up and snored like a tractor, it turned into a story that made my wife laugh, made my kids send me memes, and gave my neighbor fresh material for months. And in the grand scheme of things, isn't that worth more than being perfectly serene? I think so. If anyone tells you they meditate flawlessly every night, don't trust them. They're probably sneaking in a nap and calling it deep practice. If your spouse walks in and catches you snoring mid-meditation, just own it. Pretend you were testing a new sound bath method. Works every time. Well, almost every time. And if you ever find yourself embarrassed by a small mistake, just remember, somewhere out there, a grown man once interrogated his recliner like it was responsible for ruining his spiritual journey. And that man was me. You know, in a strange way, this whole fiasco reminded me of something very American. We don't always need the perfect outcome. What we need is a story to tell, a laugh to share, and a reason to look back and say, well, that didn't go as planned, but at least it was entertaining. So while I may never become a meditation master, I've accepted a different kind of title, the snoring monk. And frankly, it suits me just fine. Because at the end of the day, peace doesn't always come from sitting still with your eyes closed. Sometimes it comes from laughing with your family, shaking your head at yourself, and pouring one last cup of tea before bed. And so, my friends, that's the lesson I carried away from the evening I tried to meditate and fell asleep sitting up. Don't chase perfection before bed. Chase comfort. Chase laughter. Chase those little moments that make life lighter. And if you happen to fall asleep halfway through, well, congratulations. You've mastered the art of bedtime meditation the Henry way. And that, dear friends, is how my great experiment with meditation ended, not with enlightenment, but with me drooling into a recliner like a very relaxed lawn gnome. Honestly, I'll take it. If this bedtime tale gave you a smile, go ahead and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you're still awake, type the word calm in the comments. It's our little inside nod to tonight's story. Now, put the day down, tuck in, and remember, sometimes the best meditation is simply letting yourself drift off. Sweet dreams, my friends.